So it seems that there's a 3-player race for the MVP right now. The first one we're going to mention is James Harden, who is putting up video game numbers and keeping Houston alive in the playoff race. Giannis Antetokounmpo, who has been coined the modern-day Shaquille O'Neal, and I do think that that is a bit of a sound comparison. And then there's Paul George, who has entered this conversation over the last month and a half, as he just seems to keep getting better as a player, and who knows when he's going to stop. And there's arguments you could make for all three of these guys, for them, against them, and all that stuff. And one conversation that comes up a lot in the MVP discussion is degree of difficulty, looking at the players around the candidate and saying, well, if he wasn't there, would this team just be a dumpster fire? And I do think some people would say that about the Houston Rockets. They've had injuries to Chris Paul, Clint Capella, a bad start to this season, and even so, James Harden has been putting up like 40 points a game on 62 true shooting percentage to keep them alive. But what's actually kind of wild is when James Harden sits, which has happened for about 300 minutes since mid-December, this team's net rating is actually about neutral. So if you were expecting a massive drop-off when he's not in the game, it's not all the way there. Now, of course, that doesn't tell the whole story, because I would bet you if he wasn't here, they would still be really bad. But maybe there's more to that conversation than you might think initially. And if you want to make that argument, you really should be making it for Paul George, because when he is not in the game, OKC doesn't just fall off, they crater into being one of the worst teams in the league. Their net rating with him out is like -10. And to add to that, there have been some lineups this season for the Thunder where Paul George is in the game and Westbrook is sitting, and those lineups have been very successful. One in particular that has like a +25 net rating. So for all the hoopla that you can give James Harden for he's carrying his team, and he is doing that, Paul George could possibly be doing that at a level that is closer to James Harden than you might imagine. I mean, the guy really is doing something special where his scoring is just otherworldly to the point where there's no more conversation about if he's a top 10 player. He definitely is. And the team has needed him because Westbrook's shooting woes are pretty real. I mean, we all know how tough of a time Russ has had making shots this season, so if PG wasn't doing this, this team could be looking really rough on offense. So yeah, PG has been great, Giannis has as well, and for all the talk you can give Harden about the way his numbers look cartoonish, Giannis's can as well sometimes. But if we do want to play that whole carrying the team around them thing, the Bucks are a positive without Giannis on the floor. Now, the difference is still pretty drastic. With him, they have like a +16 net rating. Without him, it's like +2. And I think this conversation is more interesting for him than the other two guys, because what Coach Bud has done with this team and the system and the spacing around Giannis is amazing, but the talent itself is still not what we would typically consider finals worthy. So is it like the system is so good, plus the fact that they're in the Eastern Conference makes it to where everything around Giannis is great, or is he carrying a group of guys who are all pretty good, maybe even very good, but not good enough by themselves to win? I don't know. I think you could go either direction with that one. But if we are going to play the whole who's carrying their team more, Paul George is the winner if you want to go by math. OKC is awful without him, as I said before. Now, I think we should talk about if they can maintain what they're doing. I mean, if James Harden keeps on putting up 35 to 40 points a game and the Rockets finish with like the 3rd or maybe even 4th seed, there's a decent chance that he deserves it over these two other guys. But I do think they're going to get Chris Paul going a little bit more. He has played, and you have to guess that the Rockets realize the best version of themselves is with these two clicking and running the offense together, or at least it's his turn and my turn, because that was, of course, so successful last year, which means James Harden's just not going to get the ball as much. He's not going to be allowed to do all the things that he's been doing that has allowed him to put up these insane numbers, and if that happens, and I do think it will to an extent, then that of course hurts his bid, even if it also helps this team in the future. I think Paul George should pretty much keep on doing what he's doing. I mean, I guess there's a chance that his contested shot making will drop off, because last time I checked, he was shooting like 50% from 3 with guys who were like in his face or whatever. But this team has really bought into PG being the number one guy, including Westbrook. I mean, Russ understands who should be taking the shots on this team, and with Coach Bud's system that gets Giannis switches and it gets him great spacing at all times, and he's moving off the ball and he's amazing in transition, I think that is going to hold up, which of course helps the guy's case. Now, I've been mainly talking about offense. We should talk about the other side of the floor a little bit. Paul George's defense this season has been pretty wild. OKC has asked him to defend the best player on the other team a lot of the time. And I mean, I'm just going to be showing blocks and steals because they're easy to get for the sake of highlights, but what PG is doing just as an on-ball defender and making guys uncomfortable at all times and being great in rotations and all that, he has made a real case to be the defensive player of the year. But we shouldn't get too caught up in that because Giannis has also made a case to be the defensive player of the year, and I think this has been going a little under the radar all season. The Bucks, last time I checked, were the best defense in the NBA. Granted, OKC is right on their tails. But if you forced me to pick one of these two, I think Giannis is the better defender. And that's not a slight against Paul George at all. Giannis is just an alien who can pull off plays that maybe nobody else in the NBA can. And he doesn't just do this against the Hawks, as this video might suggest. Yeah, there's a case to be made for all three of these dudes. And who knows, with 20-something games left, maybe somebody else could enter the discussion as well. But my pick, which I think I've made a little obvious throughout this video, is Giannis. Looking at, number one, Harden and PG didn't come out of the gates setting the world on fire. They were both still awesome, but it did take them at least a little bit to get to that next level, whereas Giannis has been this good for pretty much the whole season, on top of the fact that, again, I do think his bid for Defensive Player of the Year is going a little unnoticed. And while his on-off numbers are not as drastic as PG's, they're still pretty nuts. So he's my MVP.